Now, the other thing, the thing that was really troubling to me beyond hygiene was I'm a peaceful guy. I'm a hippie too. And I don't like hurting anyone. But they paid these guys, the actors that were the bad guys, they weren't part of us. They weren't living in the, you know, we lived 24 hours a day in this place. And they were not necessarily, they did not go to this institution. They did not get their college degrees. I don't know what they were doing, but they were definitely being paid. Well, they were being paid. We made, by the way, we made $7.10 an hour. What is that? That's like 9 pesos an hour. And for most of my colleagues, that was pretty good pay. And I went, oh. But these guys made a little bit more than that. And again, their only rule was don't hit them in the head. And it was very strange because, you know, they would really steal our food and punch us and stuff like that. So you got mad. But we knew that they weren't really bad. So sometimes it was very hard. So we had to make weapons that didn't kill them, even though we wanted to. So that was really hard. So you might be asking at this point, what does this have to do with science and engineering and IBM? At that point, I was asking myself that question. But in reality, it was very much like, at IBM, actually, very few people will hit you, in my experience. But it's like anything in life, whether you're in business or engineering, you rarely have everything you need to do your job. You don't have everything you want. You don't have all the time, all the money, all the resources, all the skills. You don't necessarily look as good as you want to look. So you have to sometimes go with what you have and innovate. And the whole job on this was, I listed those constraints: water, food, cleanliness, power, bad guys. How do you make do with just the junk that was around you? And it was a closed system. We couldn't go to, you know, out to Home Depot and say, hey, I need some more nails. We had to make do. And it was pretty fun. So water, I mentioned, one of the main constraints, the first one we had to handle. So the water that they would let us get is 1 day a week. They would let us go 1.5 kilometers, about, what was it? It was 0.8 of a mile. What's that? Whatever, 0.8 of a mile to the river, and we would be able to bring back as much of the dirty, green, stinky water as we could. And water weighs about, 8 pounds a gallon. What is that in kilograms per liter? Oh, well, it weighs a kilogram per liter, of course. Dope. So we had to figure out how to make that work. So I was a Boy Scout. Anybody else a Boy Scout? You guys aren't nerdy enough. Okay. So what we had to do is we used sand and charcoal. We made charcoal, and we would pour the green, stinking water through the layers of sand and charcoal, and then we would get clear, stinky water out the bottom. But you know what? Just in case the world really does end, it takes out the chemicals, the charcoal takes out the chemicals, and the sand takes out the particles, but you need to, what? Boil it. So we ended up having to boil it, and that took a lot of energy. But this is how we did our water. And throughout the whole time, we had to figure out ways of making this better. The biggest problem was carrying the water, because what we would do is we would save the water. We had a septic tank, and we would save the water. Those big cans were up here. We had to carry the water up. And whenever the water got down to about 80 liters, we had to go into rationing, and that was no fun. That meant you couldn't really cook, you couldn't clean, but we basically had to last about a week from this much water, and it took about a day, a whole entire day, to fetch the water, bring it back, purify it, and boil it. We boiled it every day. We would boil it in those pans, and that took a lot of energy because we didn't have much fuel, so that was really a drag. We ended up having to work on that. At the early stages, we thought we were did you ever see the movie that show Gilligan's Island? It's really stupid, except that the professor was always my hero. But they always had cool things, like they had luxury items. So originally we started building luxury items like solar hot water showers. I was very interested. As I drive around Mexico, I noticed that there are most buildings have these black collectors on the roof. Not in the United States. I think you guys are really doing some cool stuff. We got an old tank, painted it black, and then we had we had to get this was about 20 meters, and we had to figure out a way of getting the water up there. So we had to make a pump system with a bicycle to take the water up there, but it was great. You could take these hot showers. It was wonderful, except it was so much work to get it out there. And one night, one of the bad guys, happened to be a girl, a bad girl, came in and drained all this water. And one of our girls got so mad, she started beating her up. The actor that was the bad lady wouldn't come to the party at the end because she was afraid of Allison. But we even had to gather, this was about sustainability, we had to gather the water at the end of the shower, and this was used to flush the toilets when we could, which wasn't very often. So, but it was nice. What we ended up doing is taking showers in there with an insect sprayer with water every week or so. It wasn't pretty. But one of my favorite inventions, we needed to create power. So we had car batteries, or a bunch of dead cars. So we could get car batteries, but we had no way of charging the batteries. So what we started to do, we did something called wood gas. When I was an exchange student, when I was a junior in college, I went to Austria. And my landlady's parents, in another language, after too much schnapps, told me that they had made their cars run on wood in the Second World War. They would do this. They would take fresh wood scraps, they would put them in a container, they'd build a fire under the wood, and it would do what's called destructive distillation. It would make this vapor come out, and they could run their cars. So I was trying to think back 30 years, 4 glasses of schnapps, and 2 languages, and this is what we came up with. Hopefully this will play. Oh, this is what we did. Michael came up with this, is we took the alternator out of a car, the generator, and we had an old gasoline motor that we got out of a lawnmower thing, but we didn't have much gasoline. We only had a liter of gasoline, so we couldn't use that for gas. So this is what happened.
We can run the generator either on gasoline, which
volume?
we could either scavenge, siphon.
Can you guys turn the volume up?
Outside, but I've got to imagine that that's getting less and less
Can I look
plentiful.
cute?
Not a lot in it, man.
With an inventory of less than 5 gallons of gas, John C. thinks of another option.
We have tons of pallets.
John's idea is called a wood gasifier. A wood gasifier consists of 2 containers, each filled with wood scraps. The wood in the first container is used to build a fire. The fire heats the wood in the second container, releasing a flammable vapor made of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and methane, known as wood gas.
And I actually looked this up a long time ago, but I've never actually built one.
The idea is great.
I like it.
Now, what was
Feels good to be
cool
using
about
my
the
brain.
show
It's fun to be
is if
able to,
something didn't
You know,
work,
sit down and
they would
do
show that it
engineering.
didn't work.
Just really using your mind to figure out a problem.
If it's successfully producing wood gas, the engineers will be able to light the vapor coming out of the nozzle.
This turned out to be mostly steam.
This is only water vapors. Only water vapors.
Vladimir has an idea on how to achieve the heat they need.
This, that's inside here.
Okay.
So we had to
The
get it closer to
gasifier's
the
fuel
fire.
container needs to reach 451 degrees
You made that
to
up.
start producing wood gas. One way to increase the temperature would be to place the wood container directly inside the drum.
So this is our little test setup. This is a metal can.
What are you thinking there, you guys?
This is just a little one.
Holy crap!
So it's
Torch
this
the
big-
end of this thing, this pipe, and
The big question, will it run off of wood gas from the gasifier?
So then we took that through a long
Because
pipe,
it's vapor and not a liquid,
to cool
the
it
wood
off.
gas bypasses
and
the
we put it in
engine's fuel
just where the
tank
air
and
filter
goes
was.
straight into the
Put a
carburetor.
little bit of gasoline to start it. And everybody was looking, I thought,
there you go.
and it worked. It really worked. And that's how we generated our power for quite a while. And I was like, oh my God. And it was really, really cool. And that was the moment where I said, this is fun. This is fun. And again, I don't know if you heard me say this. One of the things that I really liked about it is it showed if something didn't work, it showed that it didn't work, because you have to sometimes take risks. You have to try, fail again, fail better, and then succeed. And you know, sometimes it was, well, I'll tell you about that later. Sometimes it was hard to fail, especially when you knew that 12 million people were going to watch you fail. Eventually, the producers got tired of watching us cut wood, put it in the compressor, you know, put it in the thing, clear it out. So they said, John C., that was me, or Professor, they called me Professor. Professor, you got to come up with a different way of generating electricity. People are bored with that. Okay, what about, you know, they never knew what was possible. What about a nuclear reactor? No, like, no. They would say, what about solar? And I went, what? Who's going to believe we could find solar? The guy, actually, the producer, Tom Beers, took me on the roof, and he showed me about 1 in 10 buildings in LA had solar panels on it. And he said, not a lot of shoppers left. So they let us break into a building. We had to break the windows, climb up there, take the panels. Joey then made, Joey made these wooden struts. Michael welded up, by then we had enough electricity to weld, this system here, and then Morgan and I built a funny little solar tracker. Do you know how you go into your bathroom and you turn the light off and the night light goes on? It's little solar cell, cadmium sulfide cell. We had 2 of those, some relays from a car, and basically we made this thing that, and then until the sun would come into the little slit, and then it would stop. And then the sun would move on and it would go, eh. Now, if a cloud went over, it would go, eh, eh. But Michael had made it so that if it got to the end, it would go back and it would go, eh, and find the sun again. And then the sun would move that way, and it would still move this way. And then it would go, eh, but it would find it. It was pretty ugly. As a matter of fact, talk about over-design. I was so proud of this circuit that made it kind of go back and forth. I made it so that it could follow a flashlight backwards or forward. And he came up and he goes, Professor, how many times does the sun go that way? So I made it just, I used that same circuit. So sometimes he used to say the dumbest smart person he'd ever met. So it was really cool. We actually generated, so this was how we generated our power for the rest of the time. I never really thought solar power was real until I did a wrench across it, and I'll now have a permanent reminder that solar power can be quite real. But it was cool. But you know, then I mentioned that we started to get more fun, because the more power we had, the more we could build. We had welders. We had 1 welder we built, 1 wire feed welder, and Michael had the idea that we could make an electric car. So what we did is we found a 10 horsepower electric motor. That's pretty lucky. But we had a bunch of old car batteries. I made this voltage converter out of a drawer pull and the top of a barrel, and it had 1 switch that went, you know, it would go 12 volts, 24 volts, 36 volts, 48 volts, 60 volts. The problem is, by the time you got to 36 volts, it was going close to 50 miles an hour, and it was really scary. You couldn't steer it. The producers, they said, well, can you make it solar powered? And I tried to explain, well, you know what, you don't get much energy out of it. They said, it's got to be solar powered. So we put the solar panels on there to trickle charge the batteries, and it turned out to be pretty good because it was always fresh. This thing we actually used to go pick up the water so we didn't have to carry it, and it worked out great. The only problem is that one day, so we worked 6 days, we worked a 5-day week, and then the 6th day, we got to rest. We couldn't go out. We still had to eat food there and everything and cook for ourselves. But the camera guys got to go home. And so one day, on one of those dark days, we called them, Michael got this car and he decided to drive around inside. And instead of putting it into putting it into first gear, he put it into 3rd gear. The thing accelerated, hit a pallet, and it's like slow motion going, no, it's going, do. It weighed about 1,200 pounds. It came crashing down on him. We pulled him out. It was about 11 o'clock at night. He's spewing blood. He was conscious, but not really. There's sparks because the battery cables had come out. There was starting to be a fire because one of the cables had shorted. And, you know, there's battery acid everywhere. And all I could think was, cool. But anyway, he ended up having to go to the hospital, and I found about a 1 centimeter piece of his scalp in my desk the next day. But that was so cool. Anyway, where's our... There, this is the thing running. This is one of the few relics we still have. Next time, I make better steering. Occasionally, they would come to us with something that was really hard to make. They would say, well, professor, can you make a time machine? But they came to me one day and they said, can you make a radio? And I thought, well, they had in mind, like Gilligan's Island, 2 coconuts and you would call somebody up. But I like making high voltage stuff. So what I did is I made what's called a spark gap transmitter. It's the kind of transmitter that was on the Titanic. What it does is you basically have a capacitor, for you engineers, there's a capacitor and an inductor, and they're tuned to oscillate about 1,000,000 times a second. I had to create this box, this was the hardest thing, that took a 12-volt battery and made about 10,000 volts to charge it up, but it would charge up this capacitor, they have this in the wrong place, it would jump across this spark gap, and this would oscillate, and then there was a second coil around here hooked to a long wire on the roof. And it really worked. And I knew it worked because there was junk cars, I got an old AM radio, and I was able to tune it. But the way I really knew it worked is all the cameramen had these fancy earrings, okay, we're gonna follow them out. And every time I hit the key, they'd go, ah! It was interesting because we know that it went out about 20 miles. You could hear it. And every day, Leilani had written this thing, SOS, 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 we're trapped in a warehouse, we need, drugs, and we need food, and we need, like medicine, not drugs. We need, and one of the producers actually said, if that thing's really transmitting, should we be saying SOS, SOS? So every morning I would wake up at 9 o'clock and I would go out there and I know Morse code and I would say, locked in warehouse, please send rum. Locked in warehouse, please send rum. And it was really transferring. But this was really fun because this was interesting because this really worked and it was very complicated to explain. This was the hardest thing is you had to use like an ignition coil. I remember this box was my favorite thing because I used it because it would take 12 volts and then it would make a nasty spark at the end. So when I would use it to run the transmitter, I used it to run our ozone water maker. But the thing I really liked, remember the bad guys that we weren't allowed to kill? But they didn't say you couldn't shock them. So I made this pole, and it was really funny because the cameramen were really bad too, and the producers kept saying, come on, shock him. There it is. Wait. Okay, now I'm going to switch to kind of the end part where I'm going to talk about the lessons. I remember he leaned down over this. This is Michael. I've got about an inch spark to his nose. If only that was on the camera. That was. But, so the whole thing was so interesting because it was like inventing under constraints. And it really fundamentally changed my life. And many people ask me, what are the things you learned? So I'm going to tell you the 10 things that I sort of really learned there. And most of them are serious. So this is the serious part. So lesson one is team's good. And I don't mean that like, like Care Bears, like, I mean, working by yourself, if you work by yourself all the time, you're an idiot. Because what happened is we had all these people who had big egos. Oh, I've got to be famous on TV, I've got to do everything right. And in the real world, it doesn't work like that. And so sometimes you would take, including me, I would take my invention and I wouldn't show anybody unless it would work. And you didn't have enough time to do that. You didn't have the skills. I wasn't a good welder. I'm an okay welder, but he's a good welder. Anyway, I was trying to make this this transmitter actually, and I needed the ignition coil, the high voltage coil. And there was this car, an old Trans Am, that was turned over. I figured out a way I was going to go turn the car over. And I had this big complicated thing with pulleys and everything else, and it was going to take me a whole day. Michael, who always just knew just what to say, he said, Professor, you beep, 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 beep. Let us help you. And we all came out there and we went, phoom. And I thought, duh. So the big point is, sometimes you think it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's a sign of stupidity not to ask for help if you need it. And that was a big lesson for me and for all of us. So teams are good because you can actually, between you, you can make up for most of your weaknesses. And that was a really deep lesson. Lesson two, I said this early on about use what you've got. You know, you're going to go out in life, and no matter how much money you make and how much resource you have, you're going to get a project. You're going to always get projects. You don't have everything you need. You don't have all the time. You don't have all the money. You don't have all the skills. And all of us had trouble with this in the beginning of the show. Michael was saying, oh, I don't have the tools I need. Joey was saying, oh, I don't have the wood I need. Vlad was saying, what was he saying? Oh, I don't have the spices I need. And I was saying, you know, they wanted me to make stuff out of electronics, and all we had was junk. And any of you who work with electronics, all transistors look the same. You can't tell what they do by looking at them. That's the idea. They have numbers on them, and if you don't have the internet, so I had to go figure out how to get on the internet, but that's another story. They never knew about it, so. But at some point, it became a game. You know, they would ask us to do impossible things, and you would go, sure, why not? And I remember one day, I was working on this it was early. It was early. I was working on, I don't remember what I was working on. Oh, part of the high voltage thing. And I was complaining to myself and anyone who would listen that I didn't have the transistors I needed to make this high voltage thing. No, it was how long can I talk? 10 more minutes? 25. Going once? No, okay. No, I'll be. And it was the solar thing. And I was so mad that I didn't have this and I wasn't going to be able to make it work and everybody was going to think I was an idiot. And I just picked up, I had a blowtorch. I only had a little bit of propane left. And I picked this thing up. This was the lighting controller for fluorescent light. And I just started going, and these pieces were falling off of it. Some of them would catch fire. And I'd say, I guess I'm not using that one. Or, you know, and then you would get a big pile of them and you'd kind of go, I do a lot of electronics, and I would say, well, that transistor might work. You would hook it up, and sometimes it would go, and I'd say, no, not that one. And so basically, it became a game to all of us. What could we do with how little? You know, sure, a time machine with what? A paper clip and a pencil? Sure, no problem. But life, when you approach life's constraints as a game, I don't mean that in a fake way, but look at those as challenges, and it really is something that since I've been back at work, it's been much harder to scare me with a project. Lesson 3, this one was also, I don't mean it in a stupid way about yelling sex, like why can't everybody get along. I remember one time, so you put 10 people, well actually by the end, near the end we were 9 people because George was so good at getting everybody to get along, they took him off. So they wanted us to fight, because that's what reality TV is, I guess. So they would put us in this stress, not feed us enough, not give us enough water, not let us sleep, and people would fight, like Leilani and Michael. I mean, she was a karate, taekwondo person. She probably was about this big around, maybe 130 pounds. He was 220, really jacked. She kicked his, she won. But, so I don't mean that everybody should get along all the time, because that isn't going to happen. But what would happen is, you know, sometimes you're working a project and you get so stressed and you just snap at somebody. I just have to tell you what I think. You know, you did a bad job there. What happened is when people would speak because they wanted to get it off their chest, it got off their chest and it went into the room and everybody's productivity slowed down. We stopped working effectively after each yelling incident. So what we learned to do was go out, we would pick pairs and we would yell at each other, not the person we were mad at, and we would like go outside and just go, and then come back in. So you really have to figure out how to keep your anger in check because it's really bad. You know, figure out a way of defusing it before it comes up. And in work, it comes up a lot. This is one of my interesting things. One of the things that I learned, remember I was telling you that, hey, I was brought in as the computer engineer, as if that mattered. Well, each person was brought in with a label. Johnny V, Johnny V was a machinist, and he was a pretty good comedian until his medicine would take effect every day. Leilani was a martial arts instructor. Michael Raines, the solar tech, he was a builder. Morgan was an aerospace engineer. Latimer, mechanical engineer, not a very good one. No, actually, he was okay. He cared more what something looked like than whether it worked. Allison was a nurse. Amy, marine scientist, always very useful. George, a doctor. Joey, a contractor. But what you'll find in life, like any team, like it might be a team on a project at school or at work, what what their label says is not necessarily the only thing they're good at. It might not even be what they're good at. Everybody's good at something, and if you find those strengths, it kind of goes back to the team thing. You know, for example, John made all of our shoes. Leilani, she did all the work. He would go out and scare people, and you know, we would put him outside to scare the bad guys away, and either he would scare them away or they would eat him and we would be better off. Morgan she was an engineer, but she hadn't really worked, but she was very good at figuring things out. She figured out how to make cheese. Oh yeah, we found goats. She figured out how to bake bread, make an oven. She figured out how to make hammocks. So she was really good at figuring that stuff out. And Vladimir, while he was kind of a funny, his engineering idea was to make things look good. He is a really nice guy and a fabulous cook, which again was good because we would have eaten him. Allison, she and George were really the morale officer and peacemaker. They would get everything, you know, kind of to work. And that was really important when you're trying to get teams going. They ended up being sort of the leaders, keeping things moving, project managers. I really learned to respect that. Amy, she was a very good scientist. She kept detailed notes. She kept notes of everything we built, what order, who did what, who said what. And it was really fun because when they edited the show and this happened before that and they put it in the other order, we could call them up and go, hey. But she wrote things down and it was really fun because we treasure that now. We'll talk about that. I told you George was a peacemaker. Joey, as I mentioned, could make alcohol out of anything and kind of knew a lot about security. And we had to keep these fake bad guys out. I was supposed to be the computer engineer, but normally I was like Yoda. You know, I was usually preoccupied and I looked wise. That's the funny thing about having weird hair. So they would come up to me and their mouths would be moving. I'd be going like this. I'd be thinking about something else and I'd be going, ooh. And then they'd look at me and they'd go, Professor, you're right. And I'd say, what did I say? And they'd run off. So keep in mind that people have secret powers. Figure out what your secret powers are and figure out what your teammates' secret powers are. It's really important not to just go by the label, okay? Lesson 5, if you see food, eat it. And I mean this in the metaphorical sense. What I mean is, you never know what's going to happen later, as I'll tell you. You never know what's going to happen. And so if you put off, what we would have is we had some foods, we had very few good foods. We had peanut butter. And peanut butter tasted good. It had fat in it, which we really craved. And it was just yummy. You know, it tasted like fat. It tasted like real food. We just loved it. We had 2 jars of it, and we would hide it, and we would put it off till later. And you know, one of the jars would get stolen. Or we had 1 bottle of wine we found. The bad guys came in and broke it because you put it off. What I mean is, don't put off pleasure. Eat dessert first. Eat dessert now. Have fun. You know what? If you have to, don't listen. If you have to skip a class to go hear some music that you won't get a chance to hear, do it. Don't put off having pleasure. But don't do it to excess. But don't live for a later thing. So that's really important. So if you have peanut butter, eat it now. And lesson 5A is anything is food. You remember I mentioned there was the brought-in rats. These were rats from a pet store. They were nice and white. They were raised for laboratories and as food for snakes, I guess. The indigenous rats, the rats that were in there, were mean and nasty and snarly. Unfortunately, the nice rats, you didn't want to eat them because they were so cute. They were pets. We had a family of them called Cohn for the colony, and actually then the producer guys put 5 rats, a family of 5 rats, in Allison's sleeping bag, and we couldn't eat them. They were pets. But the really bad rats, let me just say, without going into detail, we didn't mind putting them on the plate, but we weren't allowed to eat them. So we had to figure out how to figure out which rat was which. But let me tell you, do you know vegetarian? You know what that is? I haven't eaten meat since 1976. It's what keeps me so young. My first red meat, rat. And I will tell you that Vlad's rat a la basil, really good, really good, really good. All right, lesson 6. How many of you write software? Okay, good. Well, this is something that software people rarely do. That's why they call it code. It's very important to document your work. You remember I told you that there were 2 people, Amy and Morgan, both kept logs. Amy kept detailed records, and Morgan kept this a wall-sized mural, which we have pictures of, which it's still on the web. And we got to figure out what was happening, and it told our story. And if you're going to do something useful, whether it's in business or engineering or science, it doesn't really count unless you can remember it. And it doesn't count, you're never going to win a Nobel Prize unless you write it down. So write stuff down. Also, something I've never been very good at until now. Now I blog every night. Lesson 7, kind of like eat your food now, eat your dessert now, is fun as a priority. You know, it was really interesting. We found we had to make fun. And it was hard to have fun there. We were working 18-hour days, something like that, with not enough food, not enough sleep. But we always found ways of making stuff fun. It was really interesting. We couldn't listen. One of the hard things is we had no music because you couldn't have music that had copyrights on there. We found some old discs. Do you recognize those? Do you remember what those are? These are records. This is what, back when I was a boy, we would listen to. And we found some of these, but we didn't have a player. So we made a player. Well, there was an old player, but there was no needle. And we took a piezoelectric device from a speaker, and we put a needle on it. Morgan and I made this, and Morgan had never seen a thing like this. And we finally had music. So we had dance contests and stuff to really stupid 1940s music, but it was great. It was great. And the producers were mad at us. They said, you guys, everyone you know is dead. It's the end of the world. You're not supposed to be having fun. But you know what we found? If we didn't have fun, we couldn't work very hard. So again, you may be working for your finals or working on your thesis. You have to take time to go out, watch a movie, go party a little, because if you don't, if life stops being fun, if your studies stop being fun, you're screwed. You really got to figure out how to keep fun in there. And so, you know what? If they drop the big one or there's a big outbreak, charades, do that, or, you know, Angry Birds. Okay. Now, this is a spoiler alert. This show has never been in Latin America. It's still playing. Right now it's playing in Sweden. I know that because every time it plays somewhere, I get 800 new Facebook friends. Find me on Facebook, by the way. That'd be good. But so my hippie wife, remember her? We left her back in Vermont. Okay, so she was very happy that I was going to go do something and do it somewhere else, I guess, so I wasn't messing up her house. But she was really supportive. I kissed her, I kissed the dogs, kissed the kids, I think in that order. And I went out from Vermont, which is up here, to LA, which is down there, not thinking I'd see her for 2.5 months about. Well, week 8 of 10, I'm working on this transmitter, and I stayed up for 2 solid days, you know, over a night, and and I knew it was Easter. I remember that. I had to work through this day because I really needed to finish it. Because if it didn't work, everyone would see it didn't work, and I would suck. So I'm sitting there working, and I'm saying I'm not going to get distracted, and I had overplanned my day because I knew exactly how much time I thought I needed, and I wasn't going to do anything. I wasn't going to eat. I wasn't going to do dishes or anything like that, and I'd overplanned. And I hadn't planned for stuff. And stuff always happens. So I'm sitting there in the middle of the day, and at that point, things were getting pretty bad in the storyline, and they kept sending people around to try to beg food or water from us, because that really would happen, like when an earthquake or something happens, people don't have enough. And we had to figure out, do we give them any water? If we gave them water, more people would come, and it was really hard. So there was a group that came by, and I said, I'm not even going to pay attention. But then I heard Leilani say, hey, John Cohn, your wife is here. And I went, my first reaction was, Cohn? How do you know my last name? And then I ran up the stairs, and I threw open we had this guard window, and I'm looking down, and there are all these actors, and I'm going, oh, no. And there is my wife, my real wife. Issued to me by IBM, by the way. An IBM issued wife. And I'm going, and all the cameras are on me, and they're like going, and what did I say? I said, who has the dogs? But anyway, I was so surprised. She ran in, and oh, she smelled good. And I should say that in addition to being a nice and wonderful hippie person and a great cook, she's also an engineer. So it was really nice to have another set of hands. And it was just so cool. And it was fun because how would I have explained this to her? I mean, you know, you really can't. so it was so nice having my best friend and my wife there, and having somebody who I could trust to work with. But no, it was really, really good. What was interesting is the moment, so we let her into the building, but we didn't let any of the other people in. The producers got mad at us, so they broke a water main, and it flooded the toilets near our beds, and it covered the beds with sewage. And you know you married the right lady when 10 minutes into the adventure, she's helping you bail out sewage from your bed, I thought, without even asking why. I just thought, oh, this is really good. I'm going to tell you a hard story now, okay? This is a sad story, and it's part of the reason that I did this. So Diane and I have 3 wonderful boys. Our middle son, Sam, died about 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago. Just an accident. He was walking across the street. And we make these rocks. I have some, and I don't have very many, but we make these rocks with his name on them that we give out all over the world. And we ask people just to take them and put them cool places. And part of the reason that I spend so much time working with kids is that's kind of my way of healing and doing good in the world in his honor. So when we went on to the show, they told us we couldn't take anything. We couldn't take our clothes or anything. But I said, I'm not going on. I took 6 of these. And when we made this water filter, as I always do, I carry a bunch of them, and I put one in the water filter, and I told my friends, my new friends, about this story, and they filmed it, and I said, Well, it turns out that my son was an organ donor, okay? You know what organ donation is? I don't know if they do that in Mexico, but it is a really cool thing that can happen in a really bad situation. Well, he donated kidneys and pancreas and heart, and when this show was on, we had actually sent out to the people, there's privacy, you can't figure out where the organs go, because it's like adoption, it's private. But we were able to send a note wishing everyone goodwill, and we had given them this stone without the website on the back. Well, a month after this show went on the air, we got a phone call from this guy. He was Sam's kidney recipient. He was almost dying, and he got this kidney, and it saved his life. And we had sent him this stone. It was in a frame over the TV, and he saw me do this, and he went, so he called me. Last year, Diane and I went to his wedding. Talk about something cool. So if I may, I don't know what organ donation is like in Mexico, but it's very important you have that conversation with your family and let them know whether you would want to do it or not, because one of the big issues is what you would want. So if you could just honor me by having that conversation with your family, it would be really cool. So you never can for all I know, maybe that's the only reason I was supposed to be on this show. I don't think it was the only reason, but it was a pretty good reason. And I guess the last thing, and this is my last chart, so it works out, except I'm going to need help. Can I get you to come here and help me? Yeah. Is that okay? This is a pretty easy job. Oh, you want to help? Yeah. Okay, you both can help. So you remember, what my big message is how do you actually pass on your passion? That's a really cool thing. You're all passionate about something. You all love something, don't you? Okay, the best way to pass that on is to have people see you do it and enjoy it. And people saw me doing this science stuff and enjoy it. But really the best way to do something, no, turn this light off, I think. Turn the light off for a second. Yeah, the best way to get a kid to do something is to tell them not to do it. So you remember I told you that we had to make weapons that didn't kill people? Well, it turns out I really enjoyed making weapons that didn't kill people. So let me tell you the story of this. This is let's see if it works.
Across the main warehouse, John C. does some inventory before planning his first weapons build.
His first weapons build. Here,
I want a couple of big projects that I need to own that actually work to my own specialty, my love of science. And I was dreaming about a flamethrower idea that I'm hoping to build.
Flamethrower. No, I need to know this.
Something at the end of a piece of propane, you could get a pretty good feather, but it won't go very far. This will give a big puff.
You can watch
a flame.
John's going to build a propane-fueled flamethrower with the help of a solenoid valve he found in the warehouse.
A solenoid valve is an electromechanical switch that opens rapidly when charged with an electric current.
hook up this barrel. We want it long enough, you're able to jam it through a window. We'll have a handle here with a trigger. The business end of this thing will be out like that.
Please don't try this at home.
And you'll be able to kind of articulate it a little bit and move it around and hopefully fire it over the marauders' heads. And if they don't back off, you fire it at them.
You know what? This was really hard to get on the plane.
Is it still flaming?
With all the parts assembled,
and look at this. It
it's
didn't
time
work
to
because I
test
didn't
the
have a good enough
flamethrower.
battery.
Not enough volume. You don't have enough voltage on your battery to open up the valve.
So
Take the one out of the truck. It should be good.
Next, John C. demonstrates the flamethrower for security foreman Joey.
You're going to hold it upright. Look at this guy's face. Okay, you're going to give me turn it upright. Upright, yeah. 3 seconds.
Good job.
3, 1, 2, 3, good.
Okay, this is huge for us. This is really
I couldn't bring a
good.
flamethrower, but I think this is a perfect. Let's try it again. One more time. Wait. Oh, where's my paper towel? Well, that wasn't very exciting. Let's try that again. Well, this is the closest I could bring. But anyway, I guess my big point is, do try this at home. I wonder if that's going to... Does somebody have something long? I can't use the flag. That would be bad. Okay, 1 sec. We'll try one more time. Anybody have questions while we're doing this? Do we have a pole? What do we have that's long? Bueno. Here. Ayúdame. Any questions while we're sitting here? Seriously, any questions? Let's try. This probably won't work, because I think Mexican hairspray, maybe. Okay, upright. 1, 2, 3. Nothing wrong with Mexican hairspray. Maybe it's safer. It should go boom. Here. For you. Don't kill anyone. Okay? Yeah, don't kill anyone. So basically, you know, the results of your own actions, they can make such a difference in the world. And sometimes opportunity is going to look wrapped in a very strange package. But all I would say is, sometimes you just really got to say, I mean, well, let's say fuá together. Just 1, 2, 3. Fuá! So do it. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, guys. I know that was long. Sorry for waiting. I know if anybody has to go, please leave. But if you've got questions or ideas of things to blow up or something, and look me up on Facebook. That's my favorite thing. So, all right, you guys. And I hope this show comes to Mexico. If it doesn't, you can find it online illegally. Not that I recommend that.
¿Alguna pregunta que tengan? ¿Alguien quiere preguntar algo?
¿Hay preguntas? No necesito. No. Necesito dormir. Okay.
Bueno.
Yeah, sí. Key points to be a good engineer. 1, well, I gave you some. I think figure out what you're good at, figure out what you're not good at, take a few risks, and you know what I think? Learn the basics. I don't mean necessarily math and physics, you have to memorize every equation, but you have to get back to the way things work. It was so interesting to me because at IBM I have all the big fancy equipment and computers and money and blah, well, not that much money, but I have all this stuff and sometimes you forget how they work. And when we were in this situation, it didn't matter. I couldn't go to the store, I couldn't go online and order stuff. I had to go back to when I was like in high school and remember how do things work, you know? And so pay a lot of attention to the design of things, how they work, and the basics of it. Sometimes, you know what I would say? Sometimes you really want to learn the new tool. I want to learn whatever the new thing is right now. And you know what? That new thing is going to change in 5 years or 2 years, or now it's probably in 2 weeks, right? So don't get so hung up on learning the newest thing. Learn the basic understanding of all of those. But I don't mean that get mired down in math. Make stuff. Work with your hands and learn what you know how to do. Figure out what you're really good at. Concentrate on that, but figure out what would be complementary skills. So I think it's learning those basics of how things work. And I think another thing I would say, or did I already use up my, I would say this. Figure out how to stay, do you love technology? You're a real geek? Let me hear you say it. Yeah, ooh. Yeah. You've got to keep hold of that because life will try to wring that out of you. So you've got to keep that. So keep doing some of the technology stuff as you get old, and it will happen in a while. But keep that love of passion, and that, whether you're an engineer or an accountant, you've got to do the same thing. Keep that passion going because as soon as you lose passion for your work, it becomes work. So don't let that happen. That's why they call it work, I guess.
Vamos a agradecer nuevamente con un fuerte aplauso a John.
Okay, gracias. Thank you, guys.
Y a nombre de la División de Ingeniería, agradecerles a todos la presencia, el interés, la participación. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.